Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Use One Productions. My name is David, and in today's quick Unity tutorial, we're going to be going over post-processing and texturing your game to make it look realistic. This is a pretty hot topic in the Discord and the comment section on how to accomplish, so that's why we're going over it today. As always, my friends, everything I use in today's video and this past series on the channel, you can find linked in a Google Drive that includes sound effects, textures, scripts. Everything used is 100% free for you guys to download and use. There's no copyright, so feel free to use it. Again, that's on a Google Drive in the description for free downloads. Something else you'll find in the description is the Discord, which I highly advise you to join. I have a lot of updates on the channel in there, as well as many talented game developers and sound designers and modelers and all this other stuff in there. Just a lot of helpful people. Not only people that are wondering about updates on the channel or anything like that, but they are also there to help you guys out. So if you have any questions, please join the Discord, and I'm sure enough myself or someone else can help you out. With all that being said, you guys, we're going to hop into the tutorial right now. First, I want to show off this website I like to use. It's called 3D Jungle, and they have thousands of free textures for you to download. All you have to do is log in, and then you can use any sort of texture you might want. So let's say you need a flooring texture. There's literally a ton, and they're all tileable. They're seamless textures, so that way when you up the tiling in Unity, it doesn't create a weird seam, and all the seams will line up for you. Just thought this would be an interesting website I could share with you guys. I'll have it linked in the description. So here we are in a blank scene in Unity. I've already gone ahead and downloaded a couple textures we're going to be using for today's tutorial. I have a grass seamless texture, which you can see right here, as well as this weird little cork wood type thing. So what I'm going to do is go game object 3D cube. I'm going to create a cube and just up the scaling right here. I'm going to do 25 by 25, just a base little cube for our player to walk around in. And then I will create a second cube, and this is what I'll use for that little wall. We'll just scale it a little bit like this so we have something to look at. Something just like that. And now we can get the texturing. So texturing these objects in Unity is way different than Blender. If you're in Blender, that's a whole different tutorial, and if you guys want a tutorial on that, obviously I can do that for you. Luckily, these base models, the cube and all these other things like spheres and cylinders and all that stuff, they're already unwrapped and ready to be used for texturing. So let's texture the ground first. What I'm going to do is actually right-click, create a material. I'm going to call this grass. Right here in our albedo, I'm going to click and drag the grass texture inside of it. I'm going to turn the smoothness down, so smoothness is going to make it shine. Obviously grass isn't shiny and metallic. If there's a light hitting it, it's gonna kind of reflect back to you, but again, grass won't do that, so I'm just gonna keep that down. Next thing what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take that texture we just used for our grass. I'm gonna do Control D to duplicate it, and then I'm gonna rename it to grass. I'm gonna do H for height, and then texturing type, I'm gonna change that to normal map. Let's scroll down and apply. We're going to see it turn blue, and that's exactly what we want. More or less, when we put it into the height map, it's going to be searching for the high points of blue. So let's go back to that texture, and that blue grass we just created, let's put that into height map. I'm going to turn it all the way down to start, but now that material we've created, we can actually click and drag into that cube area, or the ground area, I should say. So let's zoom in real close to the ground real quick, something like this. Let's go back to that height map and let's start adjusting it. You'll start noticing the grass is actually kind of moving with it. The texture is moving. The height map will almost make it look like there is little bits of grass inside the texture. From a distance you won't be able to tell, but when you look straight down you'll be able to tell. So let's turn it back down and you can see it just goes flat. When I pull it up, you can notice these sticks are almost like sticks on the ground. Okay, so obviously let me use the first person controller where you can get that from the standard assets on the asset store or in your package manager. Let's click and drag him into the scene. So if I play it right now, the grass looks awful. It's very pixelated and it's not subscattered enough. So what we're going to do is actually click the cube object, which I'm going to name ground real quick, just like that. Let's open up the texture to it, and we are going to scroll down to right here where it says tiling, and my box right now is 25 by 25, so I'm gonna go like 10 by 10. And now you're gonna notice that, for one, they lied to me. This actually is not a tileable texture. The difference between a tileable texture and a non one, you wouldn't be able to see these seams in it, and it kind of just looks fake right now, but that's fine for the tutorial. Maybe we'll change that later. But now, if we look down at the grass, it looks way more realistic. It looks like it's actually scaled properly. And obviously, it almost looks like it's almost, you know, poking out at you because we do have that height map in there. It's probably harder to see on YouTube, but I can promise you it is there. We're then going to do that same thing for this wall right here. So let me go back to that texturing tutorial thing. Let's create a new material. I'm going to call this wood. And let's click and drag that into the albedo. Now, since this is wood, we should have a little bit of smoothness on this so light can reflect because wood is kind of shiny. We can even turn the metallic up a little bit so when we, say if we had a flashlight, it would actually kind of shine towards our flashlight. Again, I'm going to press Control D to duplicate that wood. I'm going to rename it to wood H for height, texturing type normal, and remember to apply. It's going to turn blue, which is what we want, and we'll click and drag that into the material's height map. Turn it all the way down for now, and then we'll put the wood on this wall here. We're going to look at the wall and start adjusting that height map. So you can see it kind of moving. Obviously all the way up is too much because it starts to tear down here, which we don't want. So I'll back that up to about half. Again, I'll click this wall and we'll rename it to wood for now. And then in its material in the editor, we can go tiling. I'm going to put this to just 2, so that way we have a couple more slats in there. Some textures you don't want to go on the Y, because if I did 2 on this one, that's just way too much. It doesn't look realistic enough. Pull this up so it's matched with the ground. Perfect. And I'm just going to scale this a little bit better so it looks more like a wall. And then I'm just going to create like a little hut with it real quick. Back it up a tad. There we go. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to add a little light source inside. So I'm going to go light, and I'm going to do a point light. And now when we play the game, we'll be able to not only see our hut, but you can see the light reflecting off it, which maybe this is a little too much for the wood I'm using. So it's just going to take some trial and error to get the look you want. But for tutorial sake, it will work for me. Next thing we want to go over is just the directional lighting and our lighting source in the scene. So right now it's kind of just bland. It doesn't really look like the sun is doing anything because the default color is this yellowish thing. The sun is more orangish and it gives off this more orangey tone, so you really just want to play around and get that warm feeling, kind of like that. Now it kind of looks like it's midday. Something else you want to make sure is shadow type is soft shadows. If you have hard shadows, it's going to make it look like this, and it just doesn't look more realistic in my opinion. So in just my opinion, soft shadows is the way to go. We also have a lighting tab we can play around with, and if you don't have this, you go Window, Rendering, Lighting Settings, okay? Now this is where you can actually change your skybox to different things. So if I wanted a night scene, I could use this stars that I found, and it kind of changes the color of the scene depending on what the actual skybox is. But for now, I think I'm just going to stick with Unity's default skybox. I'm also going to change the resolution. Usually is 128. We're going to just bump that to 256. You won't notice a huge difference, but when you build the game, it'll look way better. Sun source, you want to make sure that's directional lighting. And that'll just ensure that the lighting is actually scaled with that one light that we're using. This is also where you can add fog to your game. It's just a little button right here that you can add. And once that loads in, you can play around with the density of it and get that look in the way you want if you're making, you know, like a horror game, or if you have like a level of detail modifier on your objects, it'll help them pop into the scene a little bit better. Kind of like the same way Silent Hill 2 used fog. For me, I'm just going to turn that off. And then once you get your lighting settings kind of like mine right now, we're just going to generate lighting. And I'm going to have to save this scene. I'm just going to call this testing scene. It might take a minute to bake. It didn't take me too long because there's really nothing going on in this scene. Okay, now that that's set up, we're going to be looking at post-processing. If you don't already have it, go to your package manager inside the Windows. And once everything loads, it might take a second for this to actually load up. I don't know why they changed to package manager over the asset store, but that's what Unity decided to do. Just type in post and post-processing will come up, and then just install it to your scene. Next, what we need to do is we need to create an empty game object. I'm going to call this post effects. Let's go back to the inspector tab. I'm gonna create a new component. Type in post and the three things will pop up: debug, layer, and volume. For your empty game object, just do volume, turn is global on, and then create a new one. You can find this in your assets and then rename it to whatever, but I'm just gonna call it the post effects profile for now. Find your camera that your player's using, add a component, and you want layer on him, the post-processing layer. Make sure the layer it's going to default to nothing. Just set that to everything. And then you can even change your anti-aliasing settings if you want to. For me, I'll just keep it as no anti-aliasing for now, just so it's not as hard as on my computer while I'm recording. Let's go to that post effects empty game object, and this is where we can start adding effects. Some effects I like to add is definitely bloom. We'll turn intensity on and turn that up. It's going to, as you can see, the lights actually intensify. This isn't really a great scene for me to be showing this off. I'll show off another scene where I have other layers and bloom actually all set up properly. You can change its threshold, which is going to either decrease or increase how much you get, as you can see. Too much bloom is bad. Don't do too much bloom. We'll do this for now. That kind of looks okay. Diffusion is something to play around with. This is just going to be, again, decreasing how much light is actually coming to the camera. So you can see if it's all the way up, it looks like the contrast is too high. So I'm going to turn that down a little bit, kind of like this. Now we're kind of achieving almost like what Unreal Engine's graphics default to, just because they use a whole bunch of bloom. Another effect I like to add is actually color grading. So with color grading, you can change how the colors look in your scene, how they pop. So what I'm going to do is actually turn saturation on. I'm going to change that to, say, 10. And now you can kind of see that the scene is actually like more colorful. If I turn it down, it's black and white. If I turn it all the way up, it almost looks like a cartoon. So let's actually put that to maybe 30, 31, whatever. Close enough. And you can see now the scene is actually starting to pop. It looks good. You can play around with the contrast, which it just does this. Adds more contrast to the scene. I don't really know how to describe it. Turn it all the way down, it just becomes a gray blob. I'm going to turn that up to, I think, like 15 for now. And then the mode, just turn that on and use high definition profile. Let's add another effect. Let's go to, let's add to motion blur. Most of the time the default settings for motion blur work. I'm just going to turn sample count up to, say, 20. And now if we play the game, we can actually take a peek at how this is looking. So you can see there's a little bit of motion blur, a little bit too much maybe, but that's fine. You can see that the lights are really bright because it's refracting off the walls, and the sky it looks beautiful almost. So if you had a proper skybox and a sun, the sun would be reflecting and it would just give this type of effect. There it is up there, but this isn't really a good example for a skybox. And now the game's actually kind of looking more like an adventure game. I could see this in like a Skyrim type game. Other effects I like to add, specifically because I like horror games. Grain is a good one to use. Let's turn the intensity all the way up, and it adds a grain to the scene, like so. I'm just going to turn it down a little bit because too much grain is bad. You can change its size. I like to change the size like really low so it's just very subtly there. Again, I don't know because of YouTube if it's going to pick it up too much, but the grain is definitely there. It helps also to fix like anti-aliasing problems. For the tutorial's sake, I'm just going to turn it up so you can actually see it in the video. That's what it would look like on a smaller scale. So just imagine that is on my screen right now. Let's do a depth of field. So this one's pretty cool. This actually adds like this little effect to the scene where it can blur stuff that is too close or too far. So if I change the focal length, you'll notice in the background here, it's starting to blur because we're too far away from it. So if you kind of want, to eliminate the fog thing and you want this stuff to pop into the scene a little bit better, that's something you could do. Specifically for me, I'm going to remove that. We can add ambient occlusion, which will add like a shadow around objects and make them look a little bit more realistic. Let's turn the intensity up so you can see what I'm talking about. You can see it changing where the light is actually hitting versus where it's not hitting. Because my directional light right now is kind of pointed this way. So obviously inside here would be darker. We got the thickness modifier, so you can turn the thickness up and down of it. So let's turn it to like right there. You can also change the color if you wanted to. You can do whatever you want with that. Let's see, what other effects we got in here? We got Vignette. I'm sorry if I said that wrong, but Vignette is going to create this little box around the camera and kind of, I'll show you. It's going to give this type of effect. So if I turn it to like this, it's almost like we're looking through the eyes of the player. Turn the smoothness, I like to have that really up, and then intensity not as much. And now it kind of looks like we're looking through the eyes of the player. It gives that little effect around the edges, and then when we kind of like start looking away, you can see at the top left of my screen, over here I'm talking about, you can see it kind of disappearing stuff because it's out of our range of seeing, in a sense. And again, the ambient occlusion is adding that type of effect around the object, which makes it look very nice. Another effect I like to use, especially when you have like a video camera in your hand and you're trying to make that type of effect of a camera, lens distortion. Let me show you what that does. It distorts how our camera sees. So it's almost like changing the FOV, but you have a different type of effect around the edges. So this is really good when you're trying to create, like I said, a camera that your player's holding. You would have a separate post effects object and camera for that, so they'd be on a different profile. This one is obviously the main one I'm using, so obviously I won't be doing that, but that is definitely an option. Something else you could definitely do is, say my ground texture, say it's way too like bland, it doesn't have enough color to it, even though you turned up the what's it called, the saturation. You can actually change the albedo color. So if I put this to green and change it all the way up, this is like an unrealistic green. But if I start tweaking the colors like this and have this very light green, or even turn it up a little bit like this, it'll add a more green grass type color to it. Let me get that good for the camera, kind of like that. Now if I play the game, the green grass kind of pops more. So if you want a more like lively grass, more alive grass, this is how you would accomplish it. And this is like the basics of getting your game to game ready. This is something you obviously would do towards the middle or end process of the game. And if you want to stop seeing your effects while you're working, just go back to your post effects empty game object, and then post processing volume, turn is global off, and then it just goes back to normal. So as you can see in this screen down here, this is what the scene looked like before, and this is what we changed it to. A pretty good example where I use this is actually right here. So you can see this is just a standard asset that I found on the asset store for free. And it already looks pretty darn good, if you ask me. The developer did very good work on this. But let me add my post-processing effects. And now it just gives it more of a realistic feel. Like the sky in the background is glowing. We have some it's blurred out when you're close to it. We have ambient occlusion on the trees, and the shadows are all nice. The colors pop. Turn that off, turn it back on. You can see the before and after. Again, if you build the game, it looks better than the editor will ever show, obviously. And to ensure you get the best quality, go to project settings, quality, and turn that to ultra right here. Make sure pixel light count is high. It usually starts like 5, and that means if you have more than 5 light sources, they won't all render at the same time. So if you have, say, 15 light sources and you change it to 15, you'll see all 15 light sources. Turn your anti-aliasing all the way up 8 times, and it'll just look better. Let me actually build this game so you can actually see what I'm talking about. Let's add open scenes, build, and then I will select this folder. And while it builds, and then I'm just going to let it build, and when it's done, I'll show you the finished product. And here's the game fully built, you guys. There's a weird flickering with the grain right now. I'm pretty sure that's just because my graphics card is trying to not only show the game, but it's also trying to record this video. But if I loaded up, say, an adventure game that one of you guys created, and I saw these graphics right off the rip, it just makes me feel warm inside. It makes me feel happy. And I'd just be overall impressed. So that has been the basics of creating good graphics in Unity. As always, my friends, please remember to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, leave me a comment on things that you want me to do in the future. Again, everything you need is in the description on a Google Drive for a free download. Scripts, models, assets, whatever I create, it's going to be on there for you guys. I will be leaving the link to the texturing website that I use, that is 3D Jungle, in the description, as well as the Discord, so please get in there. And until the next video, you guys, this is User1 Productions signing off for now. Peace.